So we are really delighted today because we're joined by Claudia Hammond, who, as many of you will be aware, is an award-winning broadcaster, author, and psychology lecturer. We're really keen to hear from Claudia today in her work, which has been really about sharing the psychological and medical research and how it can help us as individuals and communities. And we're particularly interested in the work that she's done, the brilliant work that she's done in relation to the importance of rest. And given how us as a health and care workforce, given the pressure, given that so many staff are exhausted or reporting exhaustion and stress and sometimes burnout, we're really keen to hear from Claudia today about some of her thoughts, thinking about sharing some of the research, and we can work together to help ourselves and each other. So really warm welcome, Claudia. My name's Katrina Lake. I'm working in the South East Mental Health NHS England and Improvement team with Barbara, who's also here. So just a hello from you, Barbara.
Hello, I'm Barbara Goss and I'm the ops lead for this particular work stream.
Brilliant. And I think we've introduced you, Claudia, but anything else you wanted to say before we move to questions?
No, well, just thank you ever so much for having me. I think this is a really good opportunity to talk to people about rest and how important that is, particularly with the enormous amount of hard work that, of course, has gone on in the NHS over these last few months and which will continue to go on as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claudia. We're so delighted to be having this conversation with you today. So we just wanted to start, picking up the kind of the theme of rest, and given just as I was saying earlier, just how some NHS and care staff are feeling at the moment in terms of depletion and exhaustion. Why is rest important and how can it make a difference to us?
Rest is so important. And when I'm talking about rest, I mean the things you do when you're awake and resting, not sleep. So I think it's now very, very widely recognised that sleep is really important for our physical health and for our psychological well-being. But what I want is for people to start taking the rest they do when they're awake more seriously, because it is so important for so many different things. Obviously, it's important physically so that your body can start to recuperate when you're exhausted, but it is so important psychologically and cognitively as well. And so we know, for example, that if people have a short break, their memory improves, their concentration improves. There have been some extraordinary studies done on this, and there's one that comes to mind in Scotland, where they just got people to learn lists of words, so a straightforward memory task. And then half the people had a short break in a darkened room where they could just sit down for a while. The other half did another task, an easy task, and then they had to remember all the words. And there was a significant difference between the number of words that people could remember if they'd had a break and if they hadn't. But what was really striking and amazing, I think, about this study is that they also did it with people with amnesia. And people with amnesia obviously can't make new memories. It's very hard for them to remember a list of words. Usually people can remember 14% of the words they're given. But if people had a break, that went right up to 49%, which is staggering, I think, such a staggering difference. So breaks are really important to us cognitively and mentally. If we don't get enough rest and don't get enough breaks, then there are all sorts of consequences of fatigue. We know that we make poorer judgments when we're very tired. We know that accidents can happen. Simple misunderstandings are much more likely when people are tired, and people's memories, as I said, aren't as good when they're tired. But it also affects people's well-being as well. And so I was involved in a huge piece of research called the REST test, which 18,000 people from around the world took part in, and it was devised by psychologists at Durham University. And one of the things we found that was really striking was that people's well-being levels were twice as high in those who felt that they got enough rest compared with those who felt they didn't. And 2/3 of people in the general population felt they needed more rest. And this was before the pandemic. And I can imagine that number would be higher now, and particularly amongst NHS staff who've been working so hard. So I think it is so important for our well-being to make sure we prioritise rest when we can. And obviously that is easier said than done. You know, I'm not saying it's easy to find time to rest when people are really busy, but there are things people can do.
I mean, that's so helpful, Claudia. I mean, certainly I remember, I haven't got the statistics in my head, but reading a paper about medical errors and clinical errors that was in relation to shift pattern length. And that absolutely kind of aligns with what you're describing, which is it's so critical that we are rested and have enough breaks in order to do our jobs efficiently for patients as well as for our own well-being. So really helpful.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that we know from our research that a lot of people feel guilty whenever they rest, but actually people really shouldn't feel guilty about it, because it is so important, because it is doing things like helping you make errors. It's not lazy. It's not some extra luxury on top of things. It's absolutely essential for people to function psychologically and for people to be able to do their jobs and to cope with difficult situations.
I think you've really sort of hit the nail on the head there, because if you look at our population, our workload is increasing due to the pandemic. Would you suggest they eke out time for rest within this particular environment?
Yeah, I think it's a massive challenge, and I can imagine people watching this and thinking, oh, rest, that would be a fine thing. I'd love to get some rest. But I think that there are ways of doing it. So I think while people are at work, then I think it's a question of taking any small opportunity you can find to give yourself a break in some way. And so there's interesting research from Korea on microbreaks, and these could just be 1 or 2 minutes long. And they had people take regular microbreaks throughout the day, and people could stare out of the window for a while, or perhaps go and get a hot drink and bring it back to their desk, but the only bit of the break was making it, in a way. Or they could, they were in an office, so they could just lean back in their chairs and shut their eyes for a couple of minutes. And they found that an hour later, people were still able to concentrate better. Their attention was still better. And at the end of the day, if they'd had these regular micro breaks, then their levels of well-being were also higher. And I think it's really tempting to think that we should wait to have a break until we've done everything we've got to do. And we're never going to do everything we've got to do. And we need to accept our to-do lists are really never, ever going to be done, because there'll always be something else to do afterwards. And so I think it's a question of accepting you won't get that done, and that it's okay to stop before you've completely finished something. Obviously, you can't do that in an emergency. You're going to have to plow on. But some German research found that it's really common for us all to not to delay having a break until we've finished the piece of work we're doing, and almost to have that break as a reward. So to think, well, I'll do all this and then I'll go and get a cup of tea when I finish. Now, in fact, you can concentrate harder and perform better if you've had the break. So if you possibly can, it'd be better to take that break while you've still got that really hard piece of work ahead of you. And I think that what people can do, say in a hospital situation or another situation where they can, is to, even if you can go and stare out of the window for a couple of minutes, even if you can go and just be peaceful somewhere and sit and shut your eyes for a couple of minutes, obviously not fall asleep. And I think that allowing yourself to do that whenever you can is really important. The other thing people can do if they're really busy is to reframe any time that's wasted time and look at that as a rest. So if you're forced to queue somewhere and wait for something, or you've gone to get something from another department and you've got to wait, and that's annoying, rather than thinking, oh, I can't believe it, I've got so much to do and this is going to take 10 minutes, is to think, well, in other circumstances, if somebody were to say to you, I tell you what, you can have 10 minutes now where you just watch the world go by, then you might think that would be good. So I think it's really important to try to notice any time that is spare, and to see that as a break, and to think, yeah, this is good for me, I'm breaking now, and this is good for my mental health.
I mean, I think that's brilliant, Claudia. And I think what's interesting is how we've got so used to picking up our mobile phones as soon as there is a moment's break, you know, and I noticed myself do it, you know, even, you know, there's a couple of minutes spare and I have to stop myself picking up my phone, because presumably that isn't giving us the break that you're describing.
No, I mean, quite often it depends what you're going to do on your phone. If you're having a nice chat with a friend, then that might be a bit like a break, and that might be a nice thing and takes you away from the thoughts of what you're thinking about at that moment. But the trouble is that it's random what you'll find on your phone. And what you may find is some more work. Every time you look at your emails, there's quite often some more work there that needs to be done, or reminders of things you've forgotten to do. And you don't actually need to see that email at that exact moment. If it's really, really urgent, somebody will tell you. And so I think the trouble is that it's a gamble. You pick up your phone and you don't know what it will be. It might make you feel worse, or it might make you feel better, but you don't know, and that's the trouble. And I think it's interesting that now people used to stare out of the window much more on their train journeys, say on their commute to work. Obviously now fewer people are commuting, but some still are. And it's tempting to think, well, I'll use this as a situation to get some more work done on my phone. Whereas it is your journey to work. It is allowed to be your journey. You don't have to use every moment doing that. And maybe it would be better for your well-being if you were able to resist doing that for a while and to do something different. Sorry, that could be outside work as well. So if you've missed a parcel that came and you've got to go and queue at the delivery office, or you're queuing in the supermarket, it can all feel like wasted time, but it is a rest. And if you start to see it in that way and just think, I'm just going to watch and just see what happens here, then that can feel restful and give you some extra breaks that you thought you didn't have time to get.
So do you have any more suggestions for at home of how people can attain that sort of level of sort of meaningful rest?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. What I've done in my book is to look at what is really the essence of rest and what are the activities that people find most restful. And in the research we did, we asked people which activities they found restful, and I've counted down the top 10. And what is really striking is that are all things that people tend to do on their own. Reading is actually number one, which is interesting because reading involves some effort, but it also takes you off into other worlds and away from your own thoughts. And I think that often what we want to do in order to feel rested is to stop those thoughts whirring around and around in your head, particularly the worries that can go around and around in your head that you can't get rid of, those anxieties. And an activity you find truly restful will stop that happening for you. And it will be different for different people. And so it's a question of trying to work out which are the activities that you find really restful. For me, it's gardening. I just love gardening. And I now deliberately, particularly if I'm working at home, in the middle of the afternoon, if it's not raining, then I'll deliberately go out for 15 minutes and just potter about of winter in the garden, deadheading things, and I can feel the waves of relaxation coming over me. Now, some people hate gardening, so it's not that should be for everybody. The other sorts of activities people found really restful were having a hot bath, came at number 7, going for a walk, just simply daydreaming. And I think what's interesting about these activities is some of them are ones where it needs to be something where you don't feel guilty doing it and can allow yourself to do it. And I used to feel guilty going and pottering about in the garden when I should be working. And now, having read all this research on this, I don't feel guilty now. I think, well, this is good for my mental health. I'm going to do this. And this slightly resets me again and gets me ready to carry on working. And that this is good for me. And I'm not going to feel guilty. It's a good thing. It's like going to the gym. And it's a question of finding the combination of activities that are the most restful for you. And it doesn't have to mean lying on the sofa doing nothing, which many people find very difficult, sitting still doing nothing. So it could be, in fact, going for a run. So 8% of people told us that they found running restful. 15% found exercise restful. And for some people, they can't switch off those thoughts going on in their mind until they've exerted their body a bit. And so if that's the thing that makes you feel better, and I think particularly if people are working from home, then getting out is so important, and gets easier as the evenings get lighter. But it's so important to get away, because you would have had that journey to and from work. And also it's really important to decide when to stop work, because particularly if you're working from home, there's no reason to stop. Why not just carry on? And the boundaries between work and not work have started to get more and more blended. And I think that's difficult for people, because then we feel we can never quite rest. So I think it's a question of finding the activity that is deeply relaxing for you. It could be listening to music. It could be, some people find mindfulness really helpful. Others don't get on with it so well, but it's a question of trying out the different things and then trying to carve into your time 15 minutes to do that thing without feeling guilty about it.
I mean, that's so helpful, Claudia, because I mean, I can personally relate to the doing most of my work at home at the moment, to that boundary between work and home, really challenging to keep hold of. And actually the thing that I do, which is I take the dogs out every day, kind of off lead. I go, you know, to the downs near where I live, and that's what I need, and that makes such a difference. But it's also so interesting because we recently did some kind of mental health and wellbeing guidance for staff, and we talked in there about, you know, exercise, and, you know, even, you know, there's some of the stuff we know about in order to you know, we need to be eating well, we need to be doing all these things, but we haven't included rest in there, in the way you're describing. And I think it's really about bringing that awareness of all the huge amounts of research sitting behind what you're describing. And some of that challenge, I think, is a bit cultural, which we've touched on a bit, which is actually that there is a virtue in being busy.
I think that is so true. It is very true that people think busyness is good. Busyness has almost become a badge of honor. And if, you know, somebody says to me, how are you? And I'll say, oh, I'm fine. And they say, how's work? And I'll say, oh, I'm busy, you know, bit too busy. I mean, very busy. And in a way that is, yes, true. But also, how much is that a claim to status, and for sort of saying, oh, I'm so busy, I must be really important and really in demand because look how busy I am. And so I think that the trouble is that research has shown it is true that we do value busy people more. And so we admire busyness in other people. And there's been some research by a psychologist called Sylvia Bellessa, where they made up a fake person, and they gave people her Facebook status update. For some people, they gave them updates that said things like 1 p.m. Wednesday, I've got a nice hour's lunch break now. And 5 p.m. on Friday, she'd say, that's my work done for the week. Hooray, it's the weekend. And then they gave people a busier version of Sally, who'd say things like at 1 p.m. she'd say, no time to have lunch. I'm just going to grab a sandwich, come back to my desk. And at 5 p.m. on a Friday, she'd say, lots more for me to do yet. I won't be out of here for hours yet. And they asked people what they thought of these Sally Fishers. And people actually thought that the busy one, a more meaningful job, was more organized, was better at multitasking. So they attributed all these good things to the busy person based on absolutely nothing. And so I think it has become very much a cultural thing that busyness is valued in a way that it didn't used to be. If you think of sort of 18th century gentlemen, and they were usually gentlemen of leisure, they would show off about going to their country retreats and then being back in the city and going to their London clubs. And they would show off about having a lot of leisure time. Whereas now, very successful people tend to, if you look on Instagram at celebrities, they might sometimes be on beaches, but a lot of the time they're showing how busy they are. They're showing that they're working and that they're doing all these things. And so I think it has changed in that way. And we do need to start saying, no, it's not necessarily good to be really, really busy all the time. It is okay to rest. And we needn't be trying to impress other people by looking so busy all the time. I think it was really noticeable during, particularly, I think, the very first lockdown. There was a sense that you should, particularly if people had been furloughed or even were working from home, that you should do lockdown well, and that you should at least, you know, learn a language and a musical instrument and bake perfect sourdough bread, when in fact just getting through it, all of this, is enough. It's a horrible time, and just getting through it whatever way you can is enough. You haven't got to achieve all the time. So I think it's about giving ourselves permission not to achieve. Just for a while, you can still achieve the rest of the day, but just for a while to not achieve.
So what practical things can managers and leaders do to support their staff, especially in this culture we have of busyness?
Yeah, I think for managers and bosses who want to try to support their staff's well-being and helping them to rest and appreciate rest more, one of the things they can do is to absolutely make sure that there's no cult of presenteeism, that they're not saying, oh, that's good, look at you still here all the time. I mean, sure, appreciate it. It's good to appreciate it if people have had a big workload and they're doing that work, but not to assume that it's automatically brilliant if everyone stays extra late. And to never make comments if they see people, if you see someone staring out of the window for a couple of minutes, not to make some sort of, oh, you've clearly not got much to do then type comments, you know, not to say, or even if you see someone with their eyes shut for a couple of minutes, that's okay and that's all right, and to encourage people to take their breaks. Now, I know it can be really annoying if you've got loads and loads of work to do and then your boss says, oh, you've got to stop, you've got to have a break. We don't want people working overtime. And you think, well, the workload doesn't fit into this time, so what am I supposed to do? So I think bosses need to be careful how they approach this if people have a huge workload, but to try to say it's all right for people to have a break, and that if they walk in and there's a whole group of people on a ward, a group of staff having a chat together, having a laugh for a few minutes, that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're skiving in some way and not working, and that particularly when it's so hard and so pressured, those moments are really, really extra important for people getting through it. And it's those bonds with colleagues are really crucial to preventing burnout.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And I'm just thinking about the experience of some staff that are, you know, struggling emotionally with the degree of demand that they're experiencing, some of our frontline and other staff as well. And just hearing what you're saying, Claudia, about the micro breaks, that like taking that moment. And if staff are feeling quite stressed, you know, when we get into that kind of that bit of a fight or flight, kind of we can hear our heart racing a bit, and we are struggling a bit. I'm just wondering how easy it would be sometimes for people to, if you are feeling actively quite stressed, to just take that time in a way that you can settle yourself.
Yes, I think it's often going to be in those sorts of situations taking a longer break, which would be ideal, and you know, being able to go outside and wander about and come back again would be ideal, but I can see that that's often not going to be practical. And I think one of the difficulties of this is that people have been working on a kind of emergency footing in order to get everything done, and then that has stayed for a really long time. People are still working in a way, in an emergency kind of way, which is very, very challenging. So I think if you can't the ideal would be to take a proper break and go outside. I think if you can't do that, then it is to take the micro break, and also to find a way of really switching off each time you finish home, to maybe get off, say, I don't know, getting the bus, to get off one stop earlier, so that you have a bit of peace from the bus to then walking home, where you can clear your head a bit before you then go back to the other challenges that there can be at home, particularly if people are caring for others as well there, and to try to look after yourself, and to try to find a way of saying it is okay for me to have some time that is my time alone, that can be a short time, but that will difference to you being able to look after everybody else at work and at home, and that you can only look after everyone else if you're really well yourself. A bit like the you know, on planes where you're supposed to put on your own oxygen mask before you help your child with theirs, that sometimes you've got to look after yourself in order to be able to carry on looking after everybody else, and not to feel guilty for that it's not selfish that you're going to have a break. I mean, even if you were to get home and be in a room for a little while and just listen to one song you like, you know, to listen to one piece of music, before you then attack the fray, if you like, and deal with everything else. And I think it's, if you can carve out anything like that anything that switches you off, and so switches off those thoughts in your mind. So for some people it might be something, it might be reading if you can, or it might be, you know, listening to a podcast, or listening to a story, an audiobook that's quite gripping, that you always listen to, say, on the way home. But something that switches off from work to home, I think, is really important in these really stressful situations where work can be so tough.
Brilliant. And for many of us, I think our default can be going to watch TV. I mean, would that be part of the kind of the rest that you're describing?
I think TV is really interesting, and TV did come out as the 9th most popular form of resting. And it's interesting when you look at all the research that's been done on TV, it often doesn't get a very good rap, in a way that it's there is research from a big study in Brazil which found if people watched 5 hours or more of TV every day, then they were more likely to experience depression. It's often complicated because some of the people who have depression, it means that they can't work and can't do other things, which might mean they're watching more TV because they haven't got got other things to do. So it's always hard to know the causality there. But I think that a lot of people of us are all watching more TV than we were, because there are not other options. You can't go out with some friends in the evening instead and relax that way. So I think that's fine at the moment. I think it's important to make it not a habit forever, that once people can see their friends again, I think it's really important to try to do different things and have some variety. But what is really relaxing about TV is that you're not required, you can watch it in company with someone else, but you're not required to think about them and what they want. You're not required to have conversations. We know, in fact, people talk 20% of the time while people are watching TV, they talk to each other, but the rest of the time they don't. You can sit there in parallel and just be absorbed in the same story together. And so I think TV is not as bad as it is sometimes made out to be, because I think humans are really interested in other humans' stories, whether they're true or fictional stories, and have always done that. So people have always sat around the fire telling stories, and now we just have it brilliantly realized on a screen made by the world's best directors and best actors, and it's really realistic, and we can be absorbed in these stories, and it can take us away from our own. I think it's just a question of amount. I think it's just a question of quantity, and of not watching lots and lots, and of actively choosing what you're going to watch, so that you're choosing to watch something that's good, something that's memorable. So the research seems to have shown that, an hour or two of TV is completely fine.
That's brilliant. I have been watching the worst TV though. I think I don't have to use my mind. That's what I'm watching.
Yeah, I think it's a question of choosing the programs that do relax you. I think you don't have to watch something that's difficult, deliberately. But if you're going to spend the time doing it, it might as well be something that's good and memorable. And we do know that if you don't remember it very well, then it feels as if the time has just disappeared, and then it can feel as if you've got to go to work again so soon again next day, but that the time has gone. I think it's worth sometimes trying to do something different of an evening instead, even if it's reading or listening to some music, or deciding to do something completely different and do drawing or play a game. All of these things that everyone's been trying out during lockdowns. So in order to get more rest into your lives, what you need to do is to think about your own prescription for rest, and it won't be the same for everybody. So it's a question of thinking, what are the 2 or 3 activities that you find truly restful? And these are the activities where you don't feel guilty when you do it, where it stops those thoughts whirring around in your head, and where you do feel better afterwards and more relaxed afterwards and more at peace and able to then carry on with things. And it's a question of finding those activities and then finding how you can carve time out to do those, while also looking for surprise opportunities for micro breaks, and also looking at rest that's a wasted time that you can reframe. And also, when you are taking the time to rest doing one of these things, to make sure that if you start to feel guilty about it, to think, no, this is for my mental health, this is for my well-being, this is so that I can carry on doing all the things that other people are relying on me to do. And yes, I could be doing something else on my to-do list at this moment, but even if you do, there will be some more things the next day. So to accept that it is just the case that there will always be things you feel you should be doing, but that you need to prioritize your well-being and have some rest and not feel guilty about it, and give yourself permission and allow your mind to wander and allow yourself not to be concentrating for a while. Otherwise, all our time is spent either concentrating really hard and doing, and then trying to sleep, or and then trying to sleep. And it's just those two things. And we need some light and shade to that as well. So it's not a question of the more rest, the better. If you had 11 hours a day of rest, people's well-being actually was lower if they had that much rest. It's a question of getting those rhythms between rest and activity that are right for your life and that can really help you mentally.
I think that's excellent. That's a really simple, easy to achieve guide for our staff. Anything that can really support them now and going forward. So that's brilliant.
And I think it is doable as well. It is achievable. And so I've had so many people after they've read my book, they've got in touch on Instagram and Twitter and said that they've put it into practice and that it really does work. And it's all based on evidence, so it should work, but it's really, really nice that it actually does, you know, that people do find they can do these things and it makes a difference, which is lovely.
And one of the things I really like about it is there's a lot of kind of like, oh, we've all got to do mindfulness, or we've all got to do this, or we've all got to do that. And what you're describing makes so much sense, which is we're all different and we need to find what's right for us. But I think it's great having this conversation, thinking about, you know, I guess the mental health wellbeing needs of the health and care workforce, because one of the things that, I mean, it's a huge generalization, but I think we do struggle with is actually looking after ourselves. We're so good at looking after other people. That's absolutely hardwired into us. It's what we do. And I think what you're describing is taking that step back for our patients, for our organisations, for our families, but for ourselves, and giving ourselves the permission. And that isn't always going to be that natural for some of us. But I think finding what's right for us, and that doesn't have to be, I think what's so great about what you're describing, it's not about taking a whole day out. It's about the little things that can make such a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that, yes, as you say, you know, whole day outs are marvellous, and it is great if people can manage to have a whole weekend without having to look at their emails and without letting work impinge at all. But that can be really challenging and really difficult in order to do that, because, you know, there are lots of people who are on call and work is just not like that. But it is so important to find the small moments, if you can, to just find any small moments that you can, to think, I'm going to take this opportunity and I'm going to rest and it's going to be good for me.
Yeah, I think Katrina, both of you hit the nail on the head with this, giving yourself that permission to do so, and I think people are juggling so much at work, at home, it almost seems almost a selfish act to give yourself that breather, that rest, when there's other things to be done. So it's, again, a slight cultural change to how we think about certain aspects of our own, of who we are. So that'd be great, actually. Claudia, thank you very much for the time, because I think what you've demonstrated is a number of key achievable things that we could all do, and also, which I thought was really, really helpful, some tasks and some support from managers and leaders to enable our staff to take their time to rest and reap the rewards later with a much healthier workforce. So thank you for myself and Katrina and the whole team for giving us this time today. We really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me.